Hello. So the myth has long been that in order to stay young and beautiful looking, we need special wrinkle creams. According to Dr. John Lakey, the world-renowned Beverly Hills beauty expert, most of those wrinkle fixes on the market are nothing more than glorified moisturizers. So recently, Dr. Lakey has focused his attention away from mainstream cosmetic practice to pursue a revolutionary anti-aging technology breakthrough, one that some experts say could empty the wallets of the cosmetics industry. His personal clients have dubbed his new do-it-yourself technique the age rewinder method, because it can take years or even decades off your appearance in under 2 minutes. I could do with some of this stuff. Dr. Lakey has released a step-by-step video to the public, free and uninterrupted, where he outlines exactly how to use this simple solution from home. Go watch the video at bhmdnumeral1.com/Ross right now, or just click on the link in the description box below.
Lastly, sir, we have an executive order ordering the declassification of files relating to the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
That's a big one, huh? A lot of people are waiting for this for years, for decades. And everything will be revealed.
Hello and welcome to Reality Check. This week, we're bringing you an interview from the locker with Josiah Thompson. I had the pleasure of meeting Josiah Thompson last year when I was asked by NewsNation to reinvestigate the assassination of JFK for the 60th anniversary for November 1963. It is an intriguing mystery, and as a young man, when I first studied the Warren Commission, which was the official US government inquiry into the JFK assassination, it always struck me you could drive a truck through the holes in that commission's findings. And that's exactly the conclusion that Josiah Thompson came to. Josiah's got a very interesting background. He's done perhaps the definitive investigation into the JFK assassination. In 1967, he published a book called 6 Seconds in Dallas, a micro study of the Kennedy assassination. And in early 2021, he published Last Second in Dallas, and they are two definitive tomes on the JFK assassination. And Josiah speaks with some knowledge, particularly of weapons. He's actually somebody who's quite shy about his background, but he worked in the precursors of the Navy SEALs. He was with the UDT, the Underwater Demolition Teams, a special commando unit in the US Navy. And he has an extensive knowledge of weapons, and because of his history as a private investigator, he's also a methodical investigator. Here's Josiah Thompson on the JFK assassination and why you shouldn't believe what the government tells you all the time. Tink, 60 years ago, a president was murdered. JFK was assassinated in Dallas. Officially, the government position through the Warren Commission is it was a sole shooter, Lee Harvey Oswald. Is that official version wrong?
Yes.
Why?
Couldn't have happened that way.
Why do you say that?
Because the evidence in the case will not permit it. Will not permit a single gunman to have done this.
Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the evidence, the thing I'm fascinated by is that even LBJ, JFK's successor, didn't believe the single bullet theory, did he?
There is a phone call between President Johnson and Senator Russell, who was on the Warren Commission. And they're old friends from the Senate. And they're talking about the Warren Commission's conclusions. And the single bullet theory, of course, is one of the central conclusions. And they both end up agreeing it's wrong.
The official version is that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, that there were 3 shots, 1 shot missed, 1 shot, a single bullet, caused 7 wounds, and the 3rd shot from behind JFK went to his head and killed him. Is that wrong?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, it's wrong because there were not 3 shots. There were at least 4 and very likely 5. And Kennedy was hit in the head twice. First, when you see it in the Zapruder film at between 312, 313.
That's frames 312, 313.
Those are frame numbers of the film. The film ran at 18.3 frames per second. So that's very fast. Kennedy was hit from 2 directions, from the front first and then from the rear. The first bullet impacted on a tangent to the top of his head from the right front and blew bone, blood, brain matter back and to the left.
And indeed, in the Zapruder film, you do see the president being pushed as if from the right, slumping into the left-hand side of the seat behind him.
You see him, actually, the head leads the movement, and his head and body are thrown by the impact to the left rear. He was sitting in the right corner of the rear seat, and he was thrown in the direction of his wife, also sitting in the back seat.
Now, the thing that fascinates me is the Warren Commission never got to show that film. It was never displayed, the Zapruder film, as part of the Warren Commission evidence, was it?
It was displayed in many pages of volume 18.
As a still photograph?
As a still frame photograph, yes.
Now, did the representation of the Zapruder film in the Warren Commission report accurately represent what you eventually saw on the film in the National Archive?
No. The frames are reproduced 2 to a page in black and white. There are some 287 or several hundred frames reproduced. Just 2 of those several hundred frames were, according to J. Edgar Hoover, there was a printing error, and they were reversed. What it's clear to anybody is they were reversed. I could show you that. The 2 frames that were reversed are 314, that's after 313, and 315.
Now, Tink, explain to the audience, what would the reversal of those images lead anyone to conclude?
That there was an immediate forward movement after impact, not a rearward movement, which is what actually happened.
So do you believe that those frames were reversed deliberately to mislead anyone reading the Warren Commission report into the belief that the shot came from behind?
Hoover said it was a printer's error. I'll just leave it at that. You can all make your own judgment.
You're very careful, aren't you? You stick to what you know.
Yeah.
But on its face, there is misleading evidence presented in the Warren Commission report.
Well, not in the report. This is in a volume 18 of its hearing.
So in the summary of evidence that's presented in the appendices of the Warren Commission report, there is a reversal of frames 314 and 315, which would lead anyone looking at those frames to think that the shot came from behind.
I think that's true, yes, yes. I should point out that nowhere in the report of the Warren Commission is the climax of the Zapruder film ever mentioned. The climax of the film, of course, is when you see in frame 313, the president's head explodes. You're watching, in fact, the killing of John Kennedy in the Zapruder film. And you never see its apex, nor is that apex ever mentioned.
What was that moment like when you saw the film for the first time in the National Archives? What did it tell you?
Well, technically, we were looking for all sorts of things, but the actual film that I saw in the summer of 1966 in the archives was a copy of a copy. So it was not nearly as sharp as the copy I later worked with when I was employed by Life magazine on this case.
When you saw the high-resolution imagery of the Zapruder film, what conclusion did you come to when you saw those key frames showing the moment when the president's head was hit?
Well, let me answer that in a funny way. Let me say that I felt the same thing Don DeLillo felt when he saw the Zapruder film over and over again in preparing his film Libra. Every drop of my blood, he says, every drop made me feel that the shot came from the front.
You believe it wasn't just Lee Harvey Oswald at all?
No, I don't know. One shot was fired from the 6th floor corner window to Kennedy's head, but that's not the shot at 313.
So what you're suggesting is that quite literally, whoever did kill Kennedy was on the grassy knoll.
That's right.
And that couldn't have been Lee Harvey Oswald.
No, because he was never ever near the knoll that day.
What's the evidence that you believe is the most convincing piece of evidence to suggest that the kill shot came from the grassy knoll?
It's a combination of what we see in the Zapruder film, which is Kennedy's head leading. He's thrown instantaneously backwards and to the left. His elbow comes up and he bounces off the seat. That's compelling. The compelling evidence for this is right there in the Zapruder film and always has been.
It's completely inconsistent with a shot from behind. I think there's something called the jet effect, isn't there? People have tried to suggest that the way that Kennedy's body reacted might have been due to some kind of reverse force from the impact from behind.
Right.
Do you think there's any validity to that theory?
No, that's not worth discussing. It's just not true. The supporting evidence for this is, ask the obvious question. If Kennedy's hit in the head, where does the impact debris from that go? Because, have you ever seen, you see these, Quentin Tarantino has done this several times in making his movies. A guy's in a room or something and he gets shot in the head. What happens? Well, what happens is that the bullet goes through and draws with it a whole mess of gore, which then slops up against a wall and then begins to drip down on the wall. Well, in this case, there's no wall, but there is, in fact, what Tarantino depicted. And the impact debris, we do know where it went.
So let's go through that. The two outriding motorcyclists on the far side from the grassy knoll, one of them in particular was hit by a piece of what was eventually discovered to be JFK's skull. Now, is there any way that a shot from the book depository, which was behind the presidential limousine, could have been in any way the cause of that spray?
No, a shot to the back of Kennedy's head, blowing out the front, would have thrown impact debris over the limousine.
And it didn't.
Well, a second shot was fired from the depository and did just that.
But the primary shot that, by all accounts, destroyed the back of the president's head.
Well, killed him.
Yes.
Certainly, the 313 shot killed John Kennedy.
that debris was sprayed as if the shot came from the grassy knoll.
Yes, yes. Let's take the first nearest motorcyclist, riding the inboard cycle off the left rear of the limousine, is named Bobby Hargis. And Bobby Hargis told a reporter on November 23rd that he thought he'd been hit by a bullet. He was hit so hard in the midsection by this impact debris, which was on his helmet and et cetera, that he thought he'd been hit. Only immediately he stopped his cycle. They were only going 8 miles an hour at this time. He stopped his cycle, put the kickstand down, pulled out his gun, and ran across the street up towards the knoll. He was asked then later at his deposition why he did this. And he said first he thought the shot was fired from close in. Well, actually, it was shot from about 100 feet away, so it was close in. But
he believed the shot came from the knoll.
He did, and he stumbles around trying to express this during his deposition to the lawyer. But what he says is, yeah, I mean, I could give you the quote, but I can't remember the full quote, but that's exactly what he says. The reason I ran up there was because I thought the shot came from up there, basically.
Now, he wasn't the only one, was he? There were multiple witnesses, dozens of witnesses who believed the shots came from the grassy knoll, as well as the book depository.
I'm not, let's just talk about witnesses who, the last two witnesses, as you go down Elm Street during the shooting, the witnesses that are available there thin out. And the last two witnesses on that north side of the street are first Bill Newman and the Newman family.
Now, Bill's the guy who jumps on top of his son. He's actually lying on top of his little boy.
Yeah, after the next to last shot is fired, they are erect, standing on the sidewalk beside the...
Now, what did Bill say about where he thought the shot came from?
He said he thought it came from the little garden up above.
The grassy knoll.
Up above, which is part of the grassy knoll.
Now, I want to take you through this because this is quite important evidence. There's also a woman called Cheryl McKinnon. What did she say she saw?
She thought it came from the knoll also, but she's further back, further up.
But didn't she also say she thought she saw puffs of smoke still hanging in the air?
Well, that was also seen by some 8 witnesses on the overpass, and the House Select Committee took that all up and asked an expert about this. Does smokeless powder give off any smoke? And the smokeless powder expert had to say, well, under certain circumstances, yeah. There was kind of filtered light along the stockade fence on the knoll, and that light filtered by trees there would have produced a good environment to see smoke.
Now, you said that the shot that the motorcycle outrider felt the impact of debris from probably came from about 100 feet. As I understand it, the grassy knoll position where you believe the shooter, or at least one of the shooters, was located is 95 feet from the president's car.
That's correct.
So you're pretty spot on there.
Yeah.
There are other people. There's a guy called Skinny Holland who was on the overpass. What did Skinny Holland say he saw?
Oh, Skinny Holland is something. Skinny Holland, it's not just what Skinny Holland said he saw.
Let's just tell me exactly what the evidence was that he gave, though. What did he give evidence about?
I wish I could use photographs to do this. Skinny Holland said that he was certain that the next to last shot came not from the depository. The first three shots came from up Elm Street, and he wasn't precise about where up Elm Street they were. But the next to last shot, that is the fourth shot, came from behind the fence on the knoll.
And he also saw smoke, I understand.
And he also saw smoke, as did 7 other people who later told stories of having seen smoke from the overpass.
There's also the evidence of Clint Hill, the Secret Service agent, which suggests that there were different sounds from different shots, suggesting different rifles.
Yes, both Holland and Clint Hill say that the next to last shot, the fourth shot, had a different sound. Holland told me it was like the difference between a shotgun and a .38 revolver.
There's also the fact that a woman called Mary Mormon took a key photograph.
Right.
Tell me about the Mary Mormon photograph.
Well, the importance of the Mormon photograph is that it was taken at Zapruder frame 315. That is 2/18 of a second after Kennedy was hit in the head. Even back then, I knew the importance of it was because it shows the knoll. And at a certain place in that photograph, one can see what I've always called an anomalous shape, which is about the size of a human head, and it's about 8 to 12 feet from the corner of the fence.
And that corresponds with exactly where Skinny Holland says he saw the puff of smoke.
Well, here's how Skinny Holland, the importance of Skinny Holland is that he didn't just tell people about this, he did something about it. As soon as the shooting was over, Holland took off to his left, and they climbed over a steam pipe. Holland and 3 other railroad workers did this. They climbed over a steam pipe and made their way into the mess of cars in the parking lot. They got to the corner of the fence, and about 8 to 12 feet west of the corner, they found a bunch of footprints in the mud. It had rained the night before and stopped raining around 9:15, 9:30 that morning, so the earth was wet. And they also found cigarette butts there. Well, I wanted, at that time when we had interviewed, for Life magazine, we interviewed Holland for about 4 hours one night. And then we asked him if we could meet him at Dealey Plaza so he could show us what he did that day and what he saw that day. And he did the following Saturday. Now, I knew of the importance of the Mormon photograph, so I asked Skinny Holland to stand behind the fence at the exact spot where he discovered these footprints, and et cetera, and where another witness, Bowers, in the railroad tower, also saw a couple of strangers before the shooting. A very important area. So he did so, and I went to Mormon's position and took a picture. Right. So we now have a picture of where Holland was standing when he did that, and that's important.
Now,
That's right where this shape appears in the photograph.
Was any of this evidence that you're talking about taken into consideration by the Warren Commission?
No.
Or the House Select Committee on Assassinations?
No.
Do you believe it was deliberately covered up?
I don't know. I mean, all these questions that involve the intention of people. Look, this evidence has been around since I wrote 6 Seconds was published in 1967. Nobody's laid a glove on it.
You've worked on this case pretty much since the assassination, haven't you?
Yeah, well, off and on.
60 years.
Mm.
Where are you at now? Do you believe still that the JFK assassination on the evidence was a conspiracy involving multiple shooters?
I would prefer, well, of course, but what I'd rather say is now we know. For all these years, up until the last 15 years, when I learned about the recent discovered evidence, I always saw the picture as unclear, as not coming into right focus. And it's only in the last 15 years that I can see that picture as having clarified itself. And what it clarifies itself into is not the picture of some unknown gunman who goes out there to kill the president with his buddies, but a professional hit.
It was a conspiracy.
This was, well, not only a conspiracy, but a professional hit by people who are very adept at killing people.
Take me through what you believe happened on the day. Give me a very short, succinct summary of who's where and what you believe on the evidence happened on the day.
Okay. What, of course, I'd like to do would be to complete the picture of, I only got to start to talk about what happened to one motorcyclist.
Include that in your summary, if you like.
Okay. The most important thing to me is that now we have corroboration for what we see in the Zapruder film, which is this massive throw of Kennedy being driven to the left rear.
And that corroborative evidence is?
Both motorcyclists were hit with this debris. The inboard motorcyclist on the left was hit such a blow that he said he thought he'd been hit by a bullet. He acts. He parks his cycle, crosses over Elm Street, and goes looking for the gunman because he said that it seemed to me I got hit with all this stuff to the left rear that it probably came from there.
Crucially, Tink, the spray of debris that tragically hit the motorcyclist, the police motorcyclist, could not possibly be the consequence of a shot from the book depository where Lee Harvey Oswald was allegedly.
No, that would go forward. That would go forward, not to the left rear.
So why is this blatantly obvious evidence not part of the Warren Commission findings or the House Select Committee on Assassination?
Who knows? I don't know those. I don't know the answers to those questions. I don't know if they cheated. Whatever. Look, let me get to the next motorcyclist on the left, the one outboard, farther from Kennedy. We're now 10 to 15 to 12 to the left of Kennedy. He gets impact debris, that is blood, brain, etc., only over his left side. Now, why would that be? Because his right side was closest to Kennedy. I wondered about that and wondered about that for decades. And then somebody came up with a solution. The solution, of course, is that he protected Martin.
The inboard motorcyclist protected him.
Right, the inboard, and kept the debris off him, which means this debris was moving really fast.
From the grassy knoll, from a shot from the knoll.
Well, that's true, but all we're talking about right now are the particles of, the fact that those particles of blood and brain matter, etc., were moving fast means that there was a lot of, not just velocity to them, but a lot of power caused that.
There's one particular piece of evidence that one of your colleagues, Aguilar, talks about, which is the spray of lead debris that he saw on the X-rays that he was permitted to look at. Can you explain that to me, please?
Yeah. There were various, there were cartridge cases found, 3 cartridge cases found on the 6th floor of the depository. They were matched to military jacketed 6.5 millimeter Carcano bullets. right? A Carcano bullet has a jacket of copper covering a lead base. Experimental shots were made into skulls at Edgewood Arsenal in 1964 to see what happens when one of these bullets hits a human head. Well, what happens is that after hitting the head, and these are all done by hitting the back of the head, it fragments somewhat, and there are large fragments, but nowhere do you get a spray or what might be called a lead snowstorm. That's caused by
A hollow point.
a dum-dum bullet, a hollow point bullet, or an ordinary hunting round.
So the significance of that is that whatever it was that caused the lead snowstorm inside the president's head, it was a different round of ammunition
Right.
from
right.
a different rifle.
That's correct.
And that evidence is not publicly available. It's only available if you get permission to view the x-rays.
That's correct. But
And one of your collaborators was allowed to see those x-rays.
that's true, but also Cyril Wecht was able to see it. Other people have been able in the past to see and confirmed the sighting.
There's a piece of evidence that I think is incredibly important, which is that Officer Joe Marshall Smith went to that position behind the grassy knoll, and he says in evidence that he confronted a man who showed him Secret Service credentials. Tell me that story and explain why it's significant.
Okay. Joe Marshall Smith was directing traffic at the intersection of Elm Street and Houston Street at the time. After the shooting, he testified that a woman said they were shooting the president from the knoll. She yelled at him. So he pulled out his gun and ran down into the knoll area. He ran down a street right in front of the depository. On the way there, on the way down to the knoll, he smelled some gun smoke. And that may or may not be significant. He gets there and he's got his gun out. And so he encounters this guy, and the guy immediately reaches and shows him Secret Service credentials. Somehow, Joe Marshall Smith had experience in the past with Secret Service credentials, so he knew they were Secret Service credentials.
And he let the guy go?
Pardon?
He let the guy go?
Yeah, he let the guy go.
Do you think that was possibly the shooter or one of the shooters?
I don't know.
What did the Secret Service say about whether they had any men in that position at that time?
There were no Secret Service agents on the knoll at that time.
So the implications of what the evidence suggests is that somebody had fake Secret Service credentials and they used them to escape police that day.
Well, it wasn't only that.
No, but can I ask that question? The implication of
sure.
what the evidence suggests is that a person had fake Secret Service credentials and they used them to escape the police.
Yeah, if that's correct.
I mean, I find that astonishing. That in and of itself is evidence of a conspiracy, isn't it?
I guess so. All these things are kind of fungible, though. I mean, people say they saw things, right? And yeah, they may have seen that, or they may have seen something like it. It depends on how clear their recollection is about things.
60 years on,
Yeah.
you say you now know with some reasonable degree of certainty what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Talk me through the assassination as you believe the evidence now suggests it occurred.
Okay. There were 2 volleys of shots fired in all 5. The first volley was fired from the upper reaches of Elm Street, in the general vicinity of the 6th floor window. Of those 3 shots, the middle shot could not have been fired from Oswald's rifle because the time required to get off 2 shots was absolute minimum of 2.3 seconds. And for most of us, it would be more than that. It would be 5 seconds, or et cetera, et cetera. So you have, at most, 2 shots came from the depository and 1 shot from a similar location. One doesn't know exactly what similar means because the committee has never told us that. But upper end of Elm Street, and this is what Skinny Holland said, 3 shots. And then there's a 4.8 second gap. Nothing happens for almost 5 seconds. And then there's a second volley of 2 shots. These 2 shots are fired 0.75 seconds apart. That is 3/4 of a second exactly apart. Very, very fast. It's like, as Holland described it, it was like he's clicking his fingers twice. And that, of course, so that's the scenario.
But where did those shots come from, that second volley of shots?
The second volley of shots was split. The first of the volley, that is the next to last shot, was fired from the position of the anomalous shape along the fence.
On the grassy knoll.
On the grassy knoll. It all fits.
So the evidence to you is indisputable that there were 2 shooters, minimum.
Yes. Well, two indisputable, 3 possible.
Faced with that evidence, what you're suggesting is that there was a conspiracy to kill the president, which probably involved official intervention to cover it up.
Certainly the former. I mean, not only that, but that the 2 shot, the style of this assassination was professional. Kennedy was killed 2 shots to the head within a second. That does the job.
That was a professional hit.
That means to me that it was a professional hit. And I'm deriving that simply from this scenario of what happened.
So Tink, it's 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
Most Americans weren't even born at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Why does this case matter?
Because this case set the tonality for the intervening 60 years. That's why. That's why it's important.
We need to resolve what really happened to JFK.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any political willingness to do that, though?
No.
I mean, even now, well beyond the date when the records were meant to be declassified, the government is still resisting release of records relating to the JFK assassination.
But I think that's largely just agency stupidity. That government agencies are very reluctant to have any of their documents released to the press for God knows what reason. Look, the secret to the Kennedy assassination is not sitting on some piece of paper in a government file. It just isn't, folks.
But the implications of what you're saying on the evidence is that there has to have been government, official involvement by government agencies to cover up what really happened in the JFK assassination.
Yeah, that doesn't mean the government assassinated John F. Kennedy.
But individuals within the government conspired.
Look.
No, can you please answer that question?
Yes.
I mean, I think it's a very important question. If somebody had fake Secret Service credentials, they were given fake credentials. Somebody helped them get those credentials.
Well, somebody made them up.
Sure. So you can't exclude the possibility that it was just independent rogue actors that killed the president. You don't necessarily believe that it was an action of somebody inside the state.
The overall scenario of to what happened is of a professional hit. You're right. Okay. Now, the government officials who are faced with this and who have the assassination of the president on their hands, they may not have had anything to do with this. And undoubtedly, most of the government officials who were involved in investigating the Kennedy assassination had nothing to do with it.
So is it your hypothesis that there was a cover-up, but they made it sure that on the public appearance, at least, it was Oswald, purely and simply because they didn't like the consequences if the public realized there was a conspiracy?
I think that is inescapable. In other words, that yes, decisions were made that okay, gents, we're going to have to fix this, right? We can't have the President of the United States assassinated by person or by persons unknown and let that be. That's not a stable position for our society to embrace. So we'll fix it a little.
Do you think they know their evidence stinks? Do you think the people behind the Warren Commission knew that their evidence didn't stack up?
I just don't know, and I really don't care, you know. They didn't do their duty. Their duty was to find out what happened in the assassination of a president, and they didn't do that.
Does it surprise you, though, that there is still such listlessness, such a lack of enthusiasm to investigate or reinvestigate the president's death? 60 years on, we still do not definitively know who killed JFK.
I think that's true. I think that's true.
We should know, shouldn't we? The public's got a right to know.
A healthy society requires that we know the answers to these sorts of questions.
And do you think the government could find out if it chose to do so?
That's a speculative question. I don't know.
Well, I'm inviting you to speculate. Do you think on the evidence a conclusion could be reached in a reinvestigation that this was a conspiracy? Is it time to correct the record?
Well, I'm sure that if the government wanted to reinvestigate the case, they would end up with the scenario that I've ended up with after 60 years of being with this case. That this scenario works.
And it's the only scenario that fits the evidence.
That fits all the evidence, as a number of people have concluded. I'm not the only one.
Do you think part of what motivated the cover-up was that they knew that if Lee Harvey Oswald had faced trial, he probably would have been exonerated?
No, I
mean, for the assassination, I mean.
I mean, trying Lee Harvey Oswald was the job of the district attorney for Dallas. I think if he'd had a defense attorney equipped with the evidence that we have now, any jury would have acquitted Oswald because he couldn't have done it. He can't be in two places at the same time.
When you saw the Zapruder film for the first time in high definition and realized its implications, what was the conclusion that you reached? What was it about that evidence?
Boom, he was hit from the front.
No doubt whatsoever.
No doubt whatsoever. And there never has been. I mean, that's look.
And so on that evidence, if he was hit from the
Let
front,
me tell you something.
If he was hit from the front, just to explain to our audience, it could not possibly have been Lee Harvey Oswald who fired the kill shot.
Right, we know that.
And you've assembled, I think, quite a persuasive body of circumstantial but persuasive evidence to suggest that multiple witnesses saw somebody doing something on the grassy knoll.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
And do you believe that was ever properly investigated by the FBI or any of the investigators assigned to this investigation?
No, you see this in reading the FBI 302s, which are their investigative reports of interviewing witness X, say, because their questions, they're all afraid of Hoover, and they know Hoover wants what the Warren Commission wanted.
So they were working, you believe, to a preconceived agenda.
Right. They know what Hoover wanted, right?
And what
they
did
know
Hoo-
what
what
their
did-
boss wanted.
What did the boss want?
He wanted this to be proof that Lee Harvey Oswald did it. They all know that when they're, and you get some of the really oddest things in which they're obviously bending their questions in such a way to elicit the best they can get for Hoover.
James Barger presented what at the time seemed very compelling acoustical evidence, which suggested that at least some of the shots must have come from the grassy knoll. That evidence was disputed by an analysis done by the National Academy of Sciences. Who's right?
Well, first of all, it wasn't the National Academy of Sciences. It was the National Resources Council, which is a sub-body of the National Academy of Sciences. In July of 77, the chairmanship of this, let's call it the National Academy of Sciences, was offered to Luis Alvarez, a distinguished physicist from Berkeley, who was the only well-known American scientist ever to offer an opinion on the Warren Commission. Already, he had taken a stance on that, and he was offered the chairmanship of this committee. He declined because he said all the critics, the buffs, as it were, they would never forget, that he had already taken a position on this before he was appointed. So he recommended his friend, the chairman of the physics department at Harvard, Ramsey. And so it became known as the Ramsey panel. Well, what we've also learned is that the committee made a grant application to the National Science Foundation, just the National Science Foundation for money. And in that grant application, they listed the people who should be on the committee, right? And number one was an acoustics expert, since the study that they're criticizing is an acoustic study, right? And of course, no acoustics expert to this panel was.
So the rebuttal that was done by this subcommittee of the National Academy of Sciences,
Which contained no acoustic experts.
so there was no actual acoustic expert who was qualified to be able to rebut James Barger's evidence.
Right.
So you think James Barger's evidence on the acoustics still stands?
Yes, it has been proven by research Barger did for me over the last couple of years.
And that was a recording on Channel 1 of a police radio that was left open by mistake, and it allegedly caught all the shots. And I think one of the most compelling moments in your analysis is when you match those shots that are allegedly on the police recording with what you see on the Zapruder film.
Yeah.
It's kind of a case closed moment, isn't it?
It sort of is, because you have the intervals between shots on the recording match the actual intervals that we found.
Tink, I watched that, and the person in me that likes good evidence gave a silent cheer.
Yeah.
But then I realized it's the president. It's JFK.
Yeah.
And the implications of that evidence are that JFK was murdered by multiple shooters in a conspiracy that was covered up.
I don't think there's any question of that.
And we still don't know the answers.
And I want to tell you, I'm giving up. At this point, I've done what I can. And I'm 88 years old, and my wife and I are going to go off and have some fun now.
Do you think we'll ever get an answer?
No.
So thank you for watching that long-form interview with Josiah Thompson. It's a privilege to be able to bring him to you. I love the way Josiah methodically presents the evidence to raise very grave doubts about the official explanation that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone shooter. Frankly, it's blatantly obvious to me and to a lot of people, including Josiah, that shots came from the front. There were at least 2 shooters, possibly 3 or more, and the official explanation simply doesn't wash. Will we ever get an answer? Well, obviously we're waiting for the White House to announce the release of the JFK archives through the National Archives. And will they provide an answer? I somehow doubt it, but at least it might help us towards the way towards finding out what really happened on that dreadful day in Dealey Plaza in November 1963. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And please don't forget to click that red subscribe button to ensure you get more of NewsNation's unbiased and fact-driven news coverage.